A Navy SEAL walked away from war, believing the danger was finally behind him. But his dog never stopped listening. In a quiet town by Lake Superior, instinct noticed what comfort tried to hide. No barking, no attack, just a warning that refused to move. What looked like healing was something far darker. This is not a story about violence. It's about loyalty, restraint, and faith that stands still. Where are you watching from today? Like the video and subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Legends. Lake Superior did not welcome people loudly. It did not shout with waves or crash against the shore in drama. Instead, it breathed. Slow, vast, indifferent. In early spring, the lake held a pale blue stillness, as if winter had stepped back only reluctantly, leaving cold sunlight and thin air behind. The town that hugged its edge felt the same way. Neat streets, modest houses, a place that appeared peaceful because it had learned how not to ask questions. Sawyer Reed arrived there without ceremony. At 28, he moved like a man older than his years. Not in posture. His back was straight, shoulders broad, body conditioned by discipline. But in the way his eyes scanned rooms before settling. The way he paused half a second longer than necessary before opening doors. He was tall, just over 6 feet, with a solid athletic frame that came not from display, but repetition. His face was clean-shaven, angular, unmistakably American in its symmetry. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones. No softness, but no cruelty either. His hair was cut short in a precise undercut, dark brown and always clean. Not vanity, habit. The kind that stayed long after uniforms were removed. Sawyer was on medical hold from the Navy SEALs. Not discharged, not fully active. Suspended between identities, like a door left half open. Officially, he was recovering. Unofficially, he was waiting to find out whether the life he had built himself around would take him back or let him go. The house he rented sat at the edge of town, not far from the water. Small, plain, functional. White siding, a narrow porch, and a backyard framed by thin birch trees, still bare from winter. It wasn't meant to feel like home. It was meant to be quiet. Quiet was something Sawyer understood. By day, he repaired appliances for cash. Washing machines, old refrigerators, anything that hummed, rattled, or failed when people needed it most. He liked broken things. They made sense. By night, he worked security at a small cargo dock where lake freighters came and went, hauling fish, produce, and freight through the Great Lakes corridor. The hours were long. The work was uneventful. That suited him. The only constant in his life was Nix. Nix was a German Shepherd canine, black and tan, with a muscular but lean build that spoke of purpose rather than brute force. His coat was short and dense, built for cold. His movements were efficient, almost economical, as if nothing he did was wasted. When Nix stood still, he stood completely, weight balanced, spine aligned, eyes alert. When he moved, it was deliberate. Nix was 5 years old. He did not bark unless there was reason. He did not rush. He watched. At night, when Sawyer slept, Nix slept lightly. When Sawyer's breathing changed. When his chest tightened. When memories dragged him back to places without names. Nix woke first. He pressed his body against Sawyer's legs, firm and grounding. Not demanding, not frantic. Just present. It was enough. Sawyer did not talk about the war. He did not name the things that woke him. He did not explain why silence sometimes felt louder than noise. Nix did not need explanations. That afternoon, the sunlight was cold but clean, glinting off the lake like glass. Sawyer stood in his kitchen, coffee cooling in his hand, when his phone buzzed. Another overnight shift at the dock. Short notice, extra hours. He hesitated only a moment before accepting. Money mattered. Routine mattered more. Nick sat near the back door, ears relaxed, tail resting on the floor. Sawyer knelt and scratched behind his ears, a habit that had become ritual. "I'll be back before dawn," he said quietly. Nix watched him, amber eyes steady. One slow wag of the tail. It was then that a knock came at the door. Harlow Quinn stood on the porch when Sawyer opened it. She was in her early 30s, slender, with a posture that suggested ease rather than confidence. Her light brown hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders, carefully, casual. Her skin was pale and unmarked, the kind that looked untouched by hard labor or harsh weather. She wore a light jacket, clean jeans, and boots that had never seen mud. Her smile was practiced, but not obviously false. "Hey," she said warmly. "I heard you might be working tonight." Harlow was known in town. She ran a local animal rescue organization, Quinn Care. She organized fundraisers, posted success stories online, and spoke at community events. People trusted her. Animals, they said, responded to her. "I could watch Nix for a few hours," she continued, "just to help him socialize. Dogs like him, working dogs. They need to remember how to be normal." Sawyer felt the familiar tension in his chest. Nix was not normal. Nix was trained. He glanced down. Nix had risen to his feet, body still but attentive. He did not growl. He did not move closer. He watched. Sawyer hesitated. It was daylight. The town was quiet. Harlow's reputation was solid. And a small voice in his mind whispered something uncomfortable. That perhaps he was being overprotective. That perhaps the world wasn't always a threat. "Just a few hours," Harlow said gently. "I've worked with canines before." After a long pause, Sawyer nodded. "Okay," he said. That evening, the shift ended early. Rain had begun to fall, cold and fine, turning the streets into blurred reflections of streetlights. Sawyer drove home with the heater low, fatigue settling into his shoulders. He imagined the sound of Nix's paws on the floor, the familiar weight of presence. When he unlocked the door, the house felt wrong. Not quiet. Empty. No footsteps. No breath. No warmth. The air smelled clean, but aggressively so. Sharp, chemical. Beneath it, something metallic, cold, like a place that stripped rather than soothed. Sawyer stood in the doorway, every sense narrowing. "Nix," he called softly. Nothing answered. He stepped inside. The living room was neat, too neat. A thin trail of water stretched across the floor, leading toward the back of the house. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Like something had been dragged. Sawyer did not hurry. This was the re-hook moment, though Sawyer did not know it yet. As he followed the trail, Nix's absence pressed against him harder than any noise. The house held its breath. His hand brushed the wall, fingers grazing paint worn thin by time. The smell grew stronger, clean, sharp, wrong. He reached the laundry room door. It was almost closed. A thin line of light spilled across the floor. Sawyer paused. Years of training did not shout. They whispered. He reached for the switch. The laundry room light washed the space in a hard, clinical white. Sawyer stood still for a heartbeat, letting his eyes adjust. The room felt wrong in a way that went beyond surprise. Not chaotic, not rushed, arranged. The air was warm with steam that clung to his skin, and beneath it lay that same sharp, stripped clean scent he'd noticed at the door. Something meant to erase rather than soothe. Nick stood pressed to the far wall. A short length of safety cord looped from his collar to the exposed pipe beneath the sink, adjusted just tight enough to limit movement without looking cruel. It was the kind of restraint someone used when they wanted control to appear reasonable. Nick's coat was soaked along his flank. The fur clumped and darkened, where the water had flattened it. Sawyer could see the skin beneath, pink-red patches that followed a mirrored line along both sides of the dog's body. Not splashed. Placed. Nick's ears were pinned back. His body trembled. Not from cold, Sawyer realized, but from restraint. His amber eyes were wide and glossy, fixed on something on the folding table to his left. Harlow Quinn stood there, calm as still water. Up close, she looked smaller than she had on the porch earlier that day, slim shoulders beneath a light sweater, sleeves pushed neatly to her forearms. Her hair, light brown, fine, carefully styled to fall loose, caught the overhead light. Her face was composed, almost serene, as if she were in the middle of a routine she'd performed many times before. "I'm glad you're back," she said gently. He got a little overwhelmed. Her voice was soft, unhurried, the kind people trusted. On the table lay a folded white towel, another damp and crumpled beside it. A stainless kettle sat near the edge, its spout still faintly hissing as steam escaped. Beside it stood a clear plastic bottle without a label, half filled with liquid. And just beyond, angled toward the wall rather than the center of the room, up above, a small handheld camera rested on its side, powered on. Sawyer didn't look at Harlow. He looked at Nick's. Nick's did not growl. He did not pull at the restraint. He did not bark. He stared at the bottle. Then, as Sawyer shifted his weight forward, Nick's froze. Every muscle locked at once. His paws planted. His breathing shallow and rapid. It was the same response Sawyer had seen years earlier in different environments. Tight corridors, unfamiliar compounds, moments before something went wrong. Not fear. Recognition. Sawyer took one step closer and placed his body between Harlow and the dog. "No," he said quietly. Harlow blinked. Just once. A fraction of a pause that might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. "I'm helping him," she replied. "Working through a water aversion. Dogs like Nick's, they need firm guidance." Sawyer reached down and unclipped the safety cord. His movements were slow, controlled, not threatening. Nick's flinched at the sound of the clip, then hesitated, unsure. When Sawyer rested a hand on his shoulder, Nick's leaned into it with a force that made Sawyer's throat tighten. "It's okay," Sawyer murmured. Nick's followed him out of the laundry room stiffly, glancing back once as if expecting something to follow. In the living room, Sawyer spread a blanket on the floor and guided Nick's down. The dog curled tightly, pressing his side against Sawyer's shin, anchoring himself there. His tail tucked close to his body. His ears stayed back. Harlow hovered nearby, her hands busy. She offered water, apologized, explained. "He knocked over the bucket," she said. "I didn't want him slipping. I thought, if I handled it right away." Sawyer nodded once, non-committal. He knelt and ran his fingers gently along Nick's side. The skin beneath the fur was warm, irritated. When he traced the edges of the redness, he felt the shape of it. Clean lines, nearly symmetrical. Accidents didn't leave edges. Harlow crouched a few feet away, careful not to come closer. Her hazel eyes searched Sawyer's face, measuring. Her expression shifted between concern and uncertainty, like someone adjusting a mask they'd worn too long. "I love animals," she said softly. "I'd never hurt one." Sawyer didn't respond. He stayed there with Nix until the dog's breathing slowed. Only then did he stand. "Thanks for watching him," he said evenly. "I've got it from here." Harlow straightened. For a moment, something like disappointment flickered across her face. Then she smiled again, smooth as glass. "If you need help," she said, "you know where to find me." After she left, the house felt heavier. The kettle ticked softly as it cooled. Sawyer stood in the kitchen, listening to the sound with a tension he couldn't place. Nix followed him room to room, staying close. When Sawyer turned on the faucet to rinse his hands, Nix stiffened instantly, muscles coiling, eyes fixed on the stream of water. Sawyer shut it off at once. That night, he didn't sleep. He lay on the couch with Nix curled at his feet, the dog's body rigid, even in rest. Every time the pipes clicked or the heater kicked on, Nix startled, eyes wide, scanning. Sawyer rested a hand on his shoulder until the tremor eased. Sometime near midnight, Nix lifted his head and stared toward the hallway. His ears tilted forward, then flattened again. He didn't bark. He didn't move. Sawyer felt the familiar pull of instinct, the one that had kept him alive long enough to learn how quiet danger could be. This was the re-hook moment. Nix rose and padded down the hallway, stopping at the laundry room door. He sat there, unmoving, eyes fixed on the seam of light beneath the frame. Sawyer watched from the couch, pulse steady, mind racing. The dog had no reason to be there. The room was empty, cleaned, and yet Nix waited. Sawyer stood and joined him. He placed a hand on the door. Nothing happened. After a long moment, Nix exhaled and leaned back against Sawyer's leg, as if satisfied with something unseen. Sawyer turned off the hall light and guided him away. Morning came thin and pale. Sawyer woke stiff and sore, Nix still pressed against his calf. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, revealing the quiet normalcy of the room. Furniture in place, no sign of disturbance. It would have been easy to dismiss the night as overreaction. He didn't. In the bathroom, Sawyer tested the water with his wrist before bringing Nix close to rinse the irritated skin. Nix froze at the sound, muscles locked, breath shallow. Sawyer waited, speaking softly until the tension eased enough to continue. He washed carefully, avoiding the rawest spots, his jaw set with restraint. The redness was clearer in daylight. The marks followed a deliberate path, spaced evenly where the fur thinned naturally. Sawyer had seen enough injuries in his life to know the difference between chaos and control. Later, as Nix slept on the rug near the window, Sawyer moved back toward the kitchen. His gaze drifted to the cabinet beneath the sink, the one he rarely used. He knelt and opened it. Cleaning supplies lined the shelf. Detergent, sponges, a roll of trash bags. And tucked behind them, half hidden in shadow, sat a plastic canister without a label. Sawyer lifted it slowly. The smell was unmistakable, sharp, sterile. The same scent that had greeted him at the door. The same one that clung to Nix's fur. Sawyer closed the cabinet, the weight of certainty settling in his chest. He did not confront anyone. Not yet. Morning arrived quietly over Lake Superior. The sun sat low, pale and clean, spreading a thin band of silver across the water. It was the kind of light that made everything look honest, as if nothing could hide in it. Sawyer Reed stood on his porch for a long moment, one hand resting on the doorframe, breathing in the cold air that smelled faintly of pine and thawing earth. Nix stood beside him. The German shepherd's posture was alert but restrained. His coat had dried overnight, the black and tan fur lying flat and healthy at first glance. Yet Sawyer could still see the subtle stiffness in the way Nix shifted his weight. 5 years old, strong, disciplined. Yet something in him had tightened, like a wire pulled just a little too far. "We'll get you checked," Sawyer said quietly. Nix looked up at him, eyes steady, and then turned toward the truck without being told. The veterinary clinic sat at the edge of town, tucked between a hardware store and a small diner that advertised pie on a hand-painted sign. The building was old but well kept, its windows lined with faded posters of smiling dogs and cats that had clearly lived long, ordinary lives. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and warm fur. Dr. Greta Marlowe came out from the back room when Sawyer checked in. She was in her early 60s, tall and slender, with silver hair pulled into a low bun that had probably looked the same for decades. Her face was lined, not with softness, but with use. Sun, years, long hours. Her eyes were gray and sharp, the kind that missed nothing but judged carefully. She wore a simple blue coat over scrubs, sleeves rolled just enough to show forearms marked with faint scars from animals that hadn't wanted help. "This must be Nix," she said, kneeling slowly. Nix watched her approach without moving. No growl, no retreat. Greta stopped a few feet away and waited. "Good," she murmured. "He knows himself." Sawyer noted that. Greta didn't reach for Nix. She let Nix decide the distance. When he finally stepped forward, she smiled faintly and began her examination with calm, practiced efficiency. She parted the fur along Nix's flank, fingers gentle but firm. The red patches were clearer in the bright exam light, irritation that followed a deliberate pattern, not the random chaos of a fall or scrape. Greta's mouth tightened slightly as she leaned closer. "How long ago did this happen?" she asked. "Last night," Sawyer said. "That I know of." Greta nodded, then moved to the other side. The same marks, the same spacing. After a long moment, she straightened and removed her gloves. "This is mild chemical irritation," she said. "Not severe. Whoever did it wasn't trying to cause lasting damage." Sawyer's jaw tightened. "But," Greta continued, "it wasn't accidental. There's evidence of repeated contact, controlled exposure." She met Sawyer's eyes then. "Your dog isn't afraid of water," she said. The words landed heavier than Sawyer expected. "He knows what comes with it." Sawyer exhaled slowly. Greta went on, her voice steady, clinical. "That freezing response you described, that's not panic. That's conditioning. Working dogs are trained to hold position when they detect a familiar threat pattern. He's not shutting down. He's bracing." She rested a hand briefly on Nix's neck. Nix leaned into the touch, uncertain, but soothed. "He knows something," Greta added quietly, "even if you don't yet." The drive home was silent. Sawyer kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward. Greta's words circled his thoughts, pressing against memories he preferred to keep distant. There had been moments overseas, brief, sharp seconds, when he'd known something was wrong before he could explain why, before anyone else reacted. Nix shifted in the passenger seat, then suddenly leaned forward, pawing once at the door. "What is it?" Sawyer asked. Nix whined softly, not fear, not distress, then pulled against the harness when Sawyer slowed at an intersection. Instead of turning toward home, Nix angled his body insistently to the right. Sawyer hesitated. The route was familiar, efficient. But Nix was not agitated, just certain. Sawyer turned. They drove 2 blocks out of the way before Nix settled, gaze fixed ahead. Sawyer followed his line of sight and felt a quiet chill move through him. A community notice board stood at the corner of the small park near the marina. Flyers overlapped in uneven layers, lost keys, yard sales, church meetings. Centered among them was a large, glossy poster. Quincare Animal Rescue Hope. Healing. Second chances. The image showed a dog being bathed under bright lights, a woman's hands gentle at its side. The angle, the lighting. It was clean, intentional. Too intentional. Sawyer parked and stepped out. Nick sat at his heel, eyes locked on the poster. Sawyer studied the image closely. The tiled floor, beneath the dog. The white walls, the harsh overhead light. It looked uncomfortably familiar. For the first time since the night before, doubt crept in. Am I seeing patterns where there are none? Am I projecting? He stepped back, breathing evenly, forcing himself to slow. Years ago, hesitation had saved lives. Other times, it had cost them. He chose not to decide yet. That afternoon, June Walker knocked on Sawyer's door. She was in her early 70s, short and sturdy, with curly dark hair gone mostly gray and hands that bore the marks of years of practical work. She dressed plainly, thick sweater, worn jeans, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had learned not to be ignored. "I saw you at the clinic," she said without preamble. "Figured I'd check in." Sawyer nodded and invited her inside. Nix approached June cautiously, sniffed, then allowed a brief pat. "He's a good one," June said. "Always was." Sawyer paused. "Always?" June hesitated, then waved a hand dismissively. "I used to volunteer with animal control, years back. You learn things, even after you stop." She lowered her voice. "Dogs around here have been leaving," she said. "People say they're adopted, taken in, but some never turn up again. No updates, no pictures, nothing." Sawyer felt the quiet alignment of pieces. June glanced toward the window, then back at him. "There's a cold storage facility down at the dock," she added. "Old one. Not the big port, just a transfer spot. Some of those rescue folks spend a lot of time around there." She shrugged, as if the thought unsettled her. "Probably nothing," she said. "But I thought you should know." Nick stood suddenly, ears forward, body tense. Sawyer looked down at him, then back at June. "Thank you," he said. June nodded once and let herself out. Sawyer stood in the middle of the room long after the door closed, Nix pressed against his leg. Outside, the lake shimmered under the afternoon sun, calm and endless. Somewhere beneath that calm, something waited. By the time Sawyer returned to the dock, daylight had burned itself out. The Great Lakes Transfer Pier looked different after sunset. During the day, it was loud and ordinary. Forklifts whining, gulls screaming, men in rubber boots shouting over engines. At night, it became something else entirely. The lake receded into darkness. The air sharpened. What remained were the mechanical breaths of refrigeration units and the steady hum of fluorescent lights that washed everything in a pale, unkind glow. Sawyer signed in without ceremony. The night supervisor on duty was a thick-set man named Earl Maddox, late 50s, with a gray beard cut close to the skin and eyes that carried the weariness of someone who had worked too many nights in places no one noticed. Earl nodded once in Sawyer's direction, said nothing, and returned to his clipboard. He was the sort of man who valued routine over curiosity. That suited Sawyer. Nix walked at Sawyer's left side, leash loose but present. His gait was controlled, head level, ears rotating in small, precise adjustments. 5 years old, in peak condition, Nix moved like he belonged to the space, even here, among diesel fumes and metal. The first hour passed uneventfully. Sawyer followed his patrol route along the outer perimeter, boots crunching lightly over gravel dusted with old ice. Warehouse doors stood sealed and numbered. Forklift lanes lay empty, yellow lines fading into shadow. Every few minutes, a refrigeration unit cycled on, the sound rising and falling like a mechanical tide. Sawyer logged temperatures, checked locks, scanned license plates parked in authorized rows. Nothing unusual. At 11:42 p.m., the sound of an engine broke the rhythm. Sawyer paused. Headlights appeared at the far end of the access road, cutting through the mist rising off the lake. A refrigerated truck rolled forward at a measured pace, its white trailer clean and unmarked at first glance. Too clean. Nix stopped. The leash went taut as Nix planted his feet, body lowering by inches. His tail stiffened, no wag, no warning. His eyes locked on the truck. Sawyer felt the shift instantly. The truck pulled into the lot and idled, engine rumbling low. The driver did not exit. No one waved for clearance. No radio call came through. Sawyer checked his watch. The delivery window for perishables had closed 2 hours earlier. He crouched slightly, resting a hand against Nix's shoulder. Nix did not look at him. He did not need to. "Easy," Sawyer murmured, more for himself than the dog. The truck's cab light flicked on. A man leaned forward briefly, then sat back. From this distance, Sawyer could make out only the outline. Broad shoulders, baseball cap pulled low. The truck rolled again, angling toward the interior warehouses. Toward storage. Nix shifted sideways, placing his body directly between Sawyer and the truck's path. It was not aggression. It was a barrier. Sawyer stepped with him, maintaining distance. He noted the license plate, out of state. He caught the transport logo stenciled faintly near the rear axle, an independent carrier, not one of the dock's regular contractors. The truck disappeared behind a row of buildings. Sawyer exhaled slowly and continued his patrol, eyes sharp, memory cataloging every detail. He did not follow. Not yet. By the time he reached the main office, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A notification. He opened it and froze. Harlow Quinn's face filled the screen. The video had been posted minutes earlier. The caption read, "Some dogs carry invisible wounds. Tonight, we begin healing." Sawyer watched without sound. The video showed a German shepherd standing under bright lights, water streaming over its coat. The camera angle was close, intimate. A woman's hands moved gently, reassuringly. The dog's head stayed low, eyes wide. The description did not name the dog. It did not name the owner. But it did not need to. Every detail matched. The markings. The posture. The careful framing of vulnerability. Sawyer's jaw tightened. Then he heard it. Faintly, beneath Harlow's calm narration, a sound rose and fell. Long, hollow. A ship's horn. And beneath that, the unmistakable metallic slam of a cold storage door sealing shut. Sawyer paused the video. The rehook moment did not arrive as a rush of adrenaline. It arrived as alignment, sound, place, timing. He looked up from his phone and across the lot, toward the warehouse row where the truck had vanished. The suspicion he had been carrying hardened into direction. He resumed his patrol, altering the route just enough to bring him closer to the interior buildings. Nix walked with him, posture taut, eyes flicking from shadow to shadow. Warehouse 3 sat apart from the others. Its exterior lights were dimmer, the concrete around it cracked and patched. A cooling unit thrummed steadily along its side, breath fogging in the cold night air. According to the dock's records, It was used for overflow storage. Fish crates waiting transfer. Nothing more? Nick slowed. Sawyer felt it through the leash. They approached the building's side entrance. The door was shut, locked, no movement. Nick sat, not casually, not resting. He sat as if anchored, spine straight, eyes fixed on the narrow seam where the door met the frame. His breathing was shallow, controlled. Sawyer waited. The cooling unit hissed. Somewhere inside the building, something metallic shifted. Just once. Sawyer's hand tightened around the leash. He did not open the door. He did not radio Earl. He did not step closer. Instead, he did what he had learned to do when the truth moved faster than permission. He observed. He memorized the sound, the timing, the feel of the air. After a long minute, Nix exhaled and rose, pressing briefly against Sawyer's leg before moving on. The message was clear. Not yet. Sawyer finished his shift without incident. When he signed out, Earl barely looked up. "Quiet night," the supervisor muttered. "Yeah," Sawyer said. Outside, the lake lay black and endless, reflecting nothing. As Sawyer drove home, Nix rested his head against the door, eyes open. Sawyer replayed the night in fragments: headlights, sound, the video, the door. Each piece fit too cleanly to be coincidence. At a stoplight near the marina, Sawyer glanced at his phone again. The video already had hundreds of comments, prayers, praise, donations promised. Sawyer turned the phone face down. At home, Nix paced the living room once before settling near the window. He did not sleep. Neither did Sawyer. He sat at the kitchen table until dawn, coffee untouched, watching the light creep across the floor. When the sun finally rose, pale and distant, Sawyer stood and clipped Nix's leash on with care. "Okay," he said softly. "I hear you." They stepped outside into the cold morning air. Behind them, the lake breathed on, vast and unreadable. Sawyer filed the report the way he had been trained to. No adjectives, no speculation, no narrative. Time, location, vehicle description, direction of travel, frequency. He sat in the small security office at the pier just after sunrise, the hum of the vending machine filling the silence while he typed. Outside, the dock was waking. Forklifts coughing to life, gulls circling low over the water. Inside, Sawyer's posture was still, shoulders squared, jaw relaxed. Anyone watching would have seen a man doing routine paperwork. Only Sawyer knew how deliberate every word was. When he finished, he printed 2 copies, signed both, and slid them into the internal review tray. Then, he requested access to archived security footage. Nothing urgent, nothing flagged. Just a formal request to cross-check vehicle movement during off-hour windows. The clerk on duty, a young man with tired eyes and a hoodie pulled up against the morning chill, barely looked at him. "System's slow," muttered. "Might take a bit." "That's fine," Sawyer said. Waiting was something he knew how to do. The footage arrived late afternoon. Sawyer reviewed it alone in the dim office. Nix lying near the door, head resting on his paws, but eyes open. The cameras cycled through angles, loading bays, access roads, interior corridors. At first, everything looked ordinary. Then Sawyer slowed the playback. A woman stepped into frame near the auxiliary dock entrance. Harlow Quinn. She wore a fitted jacket and dark jeans, hair pulled back in a neat, low ponytail. Even on grainy footage, her posture was unmistakable. Upright, composed, moving with purpose. She was carrying a white foam container marked "Medical Supplies" in red block letters. Sawyer checked the timestamp. The same night, the same window. He advanced the footage. Harlow appeared again 2 nights later. Same entrance, same container. different truck. And again, 3 days after that. Always outside registered delivery hours. Always brief. Sawyer leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing, not with anger, but with focus. Patterns didn't announce themselves loudly. They revealed themselves to people patient enough to watch. He noted the transport logos, the license plates, the frequency. Nix rose quietly and stood beside him, ears angled toward the screen. Sawyer rested a hand against the dog's shoulder without looking away. June Walker confirmed the pattern 2 hours later. She stood in Sawyer's kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched, eyes sharp despite the lines of age around them. "That logo," she said, pointing to the still image on Sawyer's laptop. "I've seen it before." June had been with animal control for nearly 15 years before retiring. Short, solid, practical, she spoke plainly and wasted no time on dramatics. 5 years back, she continued, we had a string of disappearances. Cats, dogs, owners told the same story. Rescues, transfers, second chances. Then nothing. Sawyer waited. Same transport company, June added. Different name back then. Rebranded twice since. Sawyer nodded once and closed the laptop. "That's all I needed," he said. June studied him for a long moment. "You planning to confront her?" "No," Sawyer replied. "I'm planning to understand her." He drove to the veterinary clinic next. Greta Marlowe greeted him with the same calm efficiency as before, silver hair immaculate, expression attentive without being intrusive. "You're back sooner than I expected," she said. Sawyer handed her a folder. "I need Nix's records," he said. "Full history, objective data only." Greta understood immediately. She didn't ask why. They sat together at a metal desk while she explained each entry, dates, treatments, observations. Greta's voice never rose, never softened. She didn't speculate. She described. "These responses," she said, tapping the page where Nix's behavioral notes were recorded, "are consistent with controlled exposure over time, not trauma from a single incident." Sawyer felt the confirmation settle, not as relief, but as responsibility. He thanked her and left. Harlow Quinn contacted him that evening. She arrived just after sunset, standing on his porch as if she belonged there, posture relaxed, smile warm. She had changed her appearance slightly. Soft sweater, lighter makeup, hair loose around her shoulders. Her skin looked pale in the fading light, unmarked, flawless. Sawyer noticed everything. "I hope this isn't a bad time," she said gently. "No," Sawyer replied. "Come in." Nix rose from his place by the window the moment Harlow crossed the threshold. He did not approach. He did not retreat. He stood. This was the re-hook moment. A low sound slipped from Nix's chest, not a bark, not a snarl, but a warning. Quiet, controlled, unmistakable. It was the first time Sawyer had ever heard it. Harlow froze for half a second before smoothing her expression. "He's still adjusting," she said lightly. "That's normal." Nix's eyes never left her. Sawyer did not correct her. They sat at opposite ends of the living room. Harlow crossed her legs neatly, hands folded, voice calm and confident as she spoke about community healing and shared responsibility. She described her program, group therapy sessions, public demonstrations, visibility. "Nix could be a symbol," she said. "People listen when they see a working dog heal." Sawyer understood then. This was not about helping Nix. This was about controlling the narrative. "You'd be giving him purpose," Harlow continued. "And you, well, your story matters too." Sawyer met her gaze steadily. "No," he said. Harlow tilted her head slightly. You didn't let me finish. I heard enough. Nix did not growl again. He did not need to. Harlow stood, disappointment flickering briefly across her face before disappearing behind practiced warmth. If you change your mind, she said, you know where to find me. After she left, Sawyer locked the door and leaned back against it, exhaling slowly. Nix pressed against his leg, solid and present. That night, Sawyer made the decision he had been circling since the pier. He sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, folders arranged neatly, notes aligned. He did not act in anger. He did not rush. He coordinated. He drafted a request to Animal Control. He prepared a summary for Port Authority law enforcement. He attached footage, logs, veterinary data, facts, not feelings. Nix lay at his feet, eyes open. You were right, Sawyer murmured. Nix didn't respond. He didn't need to. The story was no longer hers to control. The call went out just after dusk. Official on paper. Routine in tone. A delayed inspection window. A rescheduled intake. A gap just wide enough to be noticed. Sawyer had helped draft it, sitting at the narrow desk in the Port Authority office while a ceiling fan clicked overhead. He kept his language neutral, procedural. Nothing that suggested urgency, nothing that hinted at a trap. Across the table sat Officer Lena Ortiz from Port Police. Mid-30s, athletic build, dark hair pulled into a tight braid that emphasized the sharp planes of her face. Her eyes were alert, measuring, accustomed to reading rooms before reading reports. She asked few questions and took careful notes. Beside her stood Mark Ellison from Animal Control, a tall, soft-spoken man in his 40s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a habit of folding his hands together when thinking. He had spent most of his career dealing with neglect cases that never made headlines. Quiet work, necessary work. They trusted Sawyer not to because of his past, but because of his restraint. Nix lay near the door, head up, ears tracking every shift in tone. He had not been asked to be here. He insisted. Once the truck commits, Ortiz said, tapping the map, we move. No confrontation until we confirm contents. Sawyer nodded. Nix rose and pressed his shoulder briefly against Sawyer's knee, grounding. Sawyer rested his hand on the dog's neck and felt the steady pulse beneath the fur. The pier looked almost peaceful that night. Cold air rolled off the lake in slow breaths, fog hugging the concrete. Warehouse lights cast long shadows that blurred at the edges. The refrigeration units hummed, indifferent to everything else. Sawyer walked his assigned route as usual, clipboard in hand, posture relaxed. Nix paced beside him, leash slack. At 10:58 p.m., headlights appeared. A refrigerated truck eased onto the access road, moving slower than necessary. The same independent carrier, different plate, same logo. Ortiz's voice murmured in Sawyer's earpiece. Visual confirmed. Sawyer stopped near Warehouse 3. Nix stopped first. The truck rolled closer, engine idling low. The driver did not exit. The rear doors remained sealed. Nix moved forward and then sat, not resting, blocking. His spine was straight, weight evenly distributed, eyes fixed on the seam between the warehouse door and the concrete. He neither advanced nor retreated. He became an immovable point. Sawyer felt the moment settle. Target position confirmed, Ortiz said quietly. Sawyer did not touch the door. He waited. The truck's engine cut. For a long second, nothing happened. Then the warehouse door shuddered and began to lift. That was the rehook moment. Nix rose, not forward, not backward, but sideways, placing his body directly between Sawyer and the opening. His ears flattened. His breath slowed. The dog did not bark. Sawyer had seen that posture once before, years ago. in a narrow corridor where the air had smelled wrong and the silence had meant danger. Inside the warehouse, the lights flickered on. Ortiz's team moved. The doors burst open in controlled violence, boots on concrete, commands sharp and precise. The driver froze where he stood, hands raised. Another figure near the loading bay stumbled back in shock. Sawyer stepped aside as instructed, leash tight in his hand. Nix did not resist. He watched. Inside, the warehouse was colder than the night air. Rows of transport crates lined the floor, some stacked, others arranged deliberately for camera angles. Heavy tarps covered metal cages beneath, cages sized for dogs. Foam containers labeled medical supplies sat open on a table, revealing unmarked bottles, syringes, gloves. A camera rig stood assembled near the far wall. Lights, tripods, a backdrop that looked almost clinical. Ellison exhaled slowly. Jesus. Ortiz scanned the space with a practiced eye. Secure the equipment. Photograph everything. Sawyer stood, still letting the scene imprint itself. This was not rescue. This was production. Harlow Quinn arrived 10 minutes later. She stepped from the back of a patrol car with her chin high, wrists cuffed loosely in front of her. She wore a long coat over fitted clothes, hair immaculate despite the cold. Even now, her posture suggested control of herself, of the story. Her eyes scanned the warehouse once before settling on Sawyer. Then they shifted to Nix. For a fraction of a second, something raw crossed her face. Not fear, not anger. Calculation, stripped of pretense. This is a misunderstanding, she said calmly. I document rehabilitation. People want transparency. Ortiz met her gaze without expression. We'll let the evidence speak. Harlow's phone lay on a folding table nearby, its screen lit with thumbnails. Video after video. Dogs framed in vulnerability. Close-ups of reddened skin. Carefully edited soundtracks. And beneath them, message threads. Anonymous accounts offering advice. Step-by-step instructions on how to create injuries that looked alarming but healed quickly. Sawyer did not argue. He stepped forward and handed Ortiz a folder. Time-stamped footage. Vehicle logs, veterinary reports, delivery discrepancies, data. Ortiz flipped through the pages once, then closed the folder. That's enough, she said. Harlow's composure cracked, not loudly, not theatrically, but visibly. Her shoulders sagged by inches. I just wanted people to care, she said, voice softer now. They don't help unless you show them pain. Sawyer watched her carefully. She did not look at him when officers guided her toward the exit. She looked at Nix. Nix did not return the gaze. He turned away and pressed himself against Sawyer's leg, solid and present. Sawyer rested a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tremor ease. The warehouse emptied slowly. Crates were cataloged, equipment dismantled. The truck was impounded. The lake breathed on, unconcerned. Ortiz approached Sawyer as dawn began to pale the horizon. You did this clean, she said. That matters. Sawyer nodded once. Ellison knelt beside one of the covered cages, lifting the tarp carefully. Inside, the metal bars were scuffed, the floor lined with absorbent pads. No animals remained, but the marks were there. We'll trace every transfer, Ellison said quietly. Every adoption, every missing report. Sawyer believed him. Nix stood beside them, posture easing for the first time that night. His ears lifted slightly. His tail moved once, slow and deliberate. As the sun rose over Lake Superior, light spilled into the warehouse, touching the concrete, the cages, the abandoned camera rig. Sawyer clipped Nix's leash shorter and turned toward the exit. They walked out together. Behind them, the story was no longer hers to shape. The case moved upward without spectacle. By the end of the week, jurisdiction shifted to the county level. Quinn Care's operations were formally suspended, pending investigation. Its social channels frozen. Donation links disabled. The headlines were careful, non-committal. Allegations under review, rescue organization faces scrutiny. Sawyer didn't read past the first paragraph. He had learned long ago that justice rarely announced itself with clarity. It arrived quietly, piece by piece, carried by people who did not need applause. What mattered to him was the house. On Saturday morning, Sawyer stood in the doorway of the laundry room and looked at it as if seeing it for the first time. The pipes beneath the sink had been removed entirely, capped and sealed. The hook where a restraint had once been fixed was gone, the wall patched smooth. He had replaced the harsh bulb with a warm LED that softened the edges of the room, turning the white tile into something almost human. A thick mat covered the floor, its fibers dense underfoot. Nix watched from the hallway. Sawyer worked methodically, not rushed, not sentimental. He folded the old towel, clean now, neutral, and placed it on a shelf beside a stack of new ones. When he finished, he stepped back and waited. Nix did not enter. He stood at the threshold, ears rotating, nose lifting slightly as if cataloging a room that no longer matched memory. Sawyer stayed still. He did not call. He did not coax. Choice mattered. Later that afternoon, Sawyer turned on the sink in the kitchen to fill a pot. The sound of running water moved through the house, steady and ordinary. Nix stiffened for half a second, then looked at Sawyer, not toward the sound, toward him. Sawyer met the gaze and gave a single nod. Nix exhaled and lay down. It was a small thing. Sawyer felt it like a weight lifting from the chest. Weeks passed in increments so small they would have been invisible to anyone else. Nix began to tolerate water, again, not by force, not by routine, but by proximity. Sawyer washed his hands slowly, speaking when needed, silent when silence was better. Nix learned the difference between anticipation and threat. Each time the faucet turned on, he checked Sawyer first, as if confirming the present before allowing the sound to exist. One morning, while Sawyer brewed coffee and stared out at the gray-blue horizon of Lake Superior, Nix stood and walked down the hallway alone. Sawyer noticed only because the house had grown quiet. He followed at a distance and stopped at the corner, careful not to intrude. Nix stood in the laundry room. He did not step onto the mat. He did not retreat. He stood there, spine straight, eyes steady, breathing even. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Nix turned. He walked back to Sawyer and sat at his feet. The rehook moment came without drama, the understanding that the dog had chosen, and that choosing mattered more than crossing the threshold. Sawyer knelt and rested his forehead briefly against Nix's head. The dog leaned into him, solid and warm. "Good," Sawyer murmured. The town changed in ways that felt tentative but real. A group formed. Neighbors, shop owners, dock workers, quietly organizing to track missing pets. Flyers appeared on notice boards, not dramatic, not accusatory. A shared spreadsheet circulated. People talked more to one another. They watched. They listened. June Walker chaired the first meeting in the back room of the diner, hands folded, voice calm. She did not tell stories. She asked questions. She taught people how to record dates, locations, last sightings. "This isn't panic," she said. "It's attention." Sawyer attended once, standing near the door. He spoke only when asked. Nix lay at his feet, head on his paws, eyes open. The work continued. The offer from the Port Authority arrived in an unadorned envelope. A formal position, night security supervisor, regular hours, benefits modest but reliable. Sawyer accepted without hesitation. The dock felt different now. Not safer, not cleaner, but honest. Earl Maddox shook Sawyer's hand with a grunt that passed for approval. Officer Ortiz nodded once from across the lot. Ellison from Animal Control stopped by occasionally, always with updates, never with promises he couldn't keep. Sawyer worked nights and slept mornings. The rhythm suited him. Nix adjusted easily, learning the cadence of patrols, the quiet language of the dock after dark. He no longer blocked doors. He no longer froze. He walked beside Sawyer with a confidence that came not from training, but from trust restored. The case moved forward in the background. Charges were filed, evidence cataloged, videos dissected frame by frame. Sawyer gave statements when required, factual and precise. He did not testify about feelings. He did not speculate on motive. He let the data speak. When asked if he wanted to make a public statement, he declined. The truth did not need him to narrate it. On the morning the first real snow dusted the ground, Sawyer sat on the front step of his house and watched the lake breathe. The air was cold enough to sting. The sky held that pale, early light that came just before winter settled in. Sawyer held a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold, forgotten in his hand. Nix lay beside him, stretched out, head resting against Sawyer's boot. His eyes were half closed, body relaxed but alert, the posture of an animal that trusted the ground beneath him. Sawyer did not think about the dock or the warehouse or the videos. He thought about the moment he had stood in the doorway of the laundry room and chosen not to rush. About the way Nix had learned to look to him first. About how restraint could be an act of protection. The lake shifted, a low sound rolling in from the distance. Nix lifted his head once, then settled again. Sawyer rested his hand on the dog's shoulder and stayed there, feeling the warmth, the steadiness. The story had never been about rescue in the way people like to imagine it. It had been about refusal. Refusal to turn away. Refusal to simplify pain. Refusal to let fear dictate the shape of the truth. Nix had not saved Sawyer with strength. He had saved him by standing still when it mattered, and by making sure Sawyer did the same. The sun climbed higher, light spreading across the water. They remained where they were. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or visions in the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly, through instinct, restraint, and a loyalty that refuses to look away. Nix did not save Sawyer with force. He saved him by sensing danger before it had a name, by standing still when turning away would have been easier, and by reminding a wounded man that protection is not optional. It is a calling. In everyday life, we are given the same choice. To notice what others ignore, to listen when something feels wrong, to stand between harm and those who cannot speak for themselves. Faith is not proven in words. It is revealed in action, in responsibility, and in the courage to stay present when it would be simpler to walk away. If this story moved you, let it be a reminder to be the shelter, the witness, and the voice where silence once lived. Share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Legends to support stories of loyalty, courage, and quiet faith. May God watch over you, your loved ones, and every soul, human or animal, who depends on another's courage to be safe.